It is impossible to speak about the concept of action learning without mentioning the visionary role of Professor Reg Revans. Since 1928, Professor Revans has applied action learning in many diverse situations, from the jungles of Nigeria and the classrooms of Leningrad to the directorates of Belgium. In essence, his equation for learning is L equals P plus Q, that is, programmed knowledge plus questioning insight. Programmed knowledge, or knowledge learned from books and experts, is inadequate to keep pace with a rapidly changing world. Therefore, Professor Revans suggests that learning should be supplemented by questioning insight. And it is this question-based approach to learning that differs from normal training. Learning how to ask questions in conditions of risk and uncertainty is what action learning is all about. By working together on real problems like comrades in adversity, we can learn with and from each other. John Marney and Dennis Lowney spoke to Professor Revans at the First World Congress on Action Research and Process Management in Brisbane and asked what triggered his interest in this area.
I think the first impression I ever had that we must recognize the limitations of our own abilities. We may have university degrees, we may have been professors, we may be extremely highly regarded as competent experts, but we must also remember that when we deal with reality, which is a very complicated thing compared with what you study in a university, you need something other than your knowledge. You need to be wise as well as being clever. And this was first brought home to me by my father. My father was eventually His Majesty's Principal Surveyor of Mercantile Shipping. And when I was very small, Britain was then by far the biggest, had the biggest merchant fleet in the world. So looking after its safety measures, the design of its ships and so forth was a very important job. My father, when I was 5 years of age in 1912, was a major contributor to the inquiry into the loss of Titanic, which had sunk in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with a loss of 1,500 lives. And I can remember as a little boy of 5 the excitement of all this. But later on I asked my father what he thought he had learned most from this inquiry. And he said, it is the difference between cleverness and wisdom. You can have all kinds of clever people who will design vessels for you, all kinds of able mariners to run them out to sea for you. But if you run into unusual conditions, you may have not only to have a lot of experts who understand this, that, and the other. You may need wise people who take a wider view and say, look here, I think I understand this, but there are certain very profound questions I should be asking myself. If I run away with the idea that I understand everything there is because I am expertly qualified, I'm not only get into trouble, but people around me too. Now this I picked up when I was quite young, but it came out later on when I, at the age of 23, when I entered the Cavendish, no, 21. I entered the Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge, which was without any doubt the biggest concentration of intellectual ability on human record. We had 10 Nobel Prize winners at the time, 10 Nobel Prize winners in one laboratory. There are many states which are glad to have one Nobel Prize winner among its total inhabitants. Many universities which are very proud to have one in the whole university. We had 10 in one department, physics. And there I learned what my father, I saw what my father had said about the difference between being clever and being wise. Because once a week, once a week, all these geniuses, and for 7 years I shared their company, all these geniuses met, they had a seminar, and you were allowed and encouraged to speak at that seminar on condition that you spoke about things which weren't going well with your work. I haven't met any organization anywhere else where the people got together in order to barter their ignorance, their confusion, their misunderstandings. Normally when clever people get together, my golly, you should see how they behave. Their sole, their only activity is to convince each other that they know more about what's going on than anybody else. But the Titanic inquiry didn't run to that effect, nor did the Cavendish. And I've heard Rutherford, a marvellous chap, son of a New Zealand sheep farmer, say more than once, what impresses me most about this discussion is my own bloody ignorance. What does yours look like to you? So that was long, long ago, and one time a chap called Einstein turned up at this, and I had one or two conversations, even cleaned the blackboard for him. So action learning came out of quite serious discussions about how we were trying to do such things as discover the neutron or find out what the atom was. So there, I learned that topics can be very interesting, but you must never run away with the idea that you understand them. And action learning has, in the subsequent 50 years, said, look, if we really are going to understand the mess this, whatever it may be, is in, it's not enough to rely upon our expert knowledge. Expert knowledge is necessary, but it is not sufficient. We have to learn how to ask ourselves totally different questions. That's what action learning is.
What are the benefits of action learning as you see it, as distinct from traditional learning?
Well, let me quote not Albert Einstein or Lord Rutherford, but the school children of Perth. There must be people even in Brisbane who've heard of Perth. I had turned this whole idea that the distinction between cleverness and wisdom, I tried to simplify it by saying we learn in this life. That is, we become acquainted to deal with conditions which might arise tomorrow, which didn't arise yesterday. We get used to dealing with change, and I'm very glad to see that a lot of Australians are asking this question. Things are changing, how do we deal with them? Well, the children of Perth heard that I had been talking about this learning equation, that I call it. I say learning consists in two things: what other people tell you and what you may think up for yourself. That's a very simple way of putting it. But day after day, you can be attending lectures. You can even be watching me on television for that, or video for that matter. You can be picking up ideas you get from other people, and they may be helpful. But if you say, this man or this woman understands so much about this topic that I needn't start asking myself fresh questions, you're in trouble. And the school children of Perth somehow found that I had been talking about action learning. Learning equals P, programmed instruction, plus Q, questioning insight. L equals P plus Q. These kids had been picking this up, and they met the children from other schools and said, look, we should be thinking about our school syllabus and having much more chance to ask questions than we're getting at the moment. And they wrote a paper called the Q Factor Centre, which they sent to the Ministry of Education, saying what we should be doing in school is giving a lot more time to questioning. And this has led to many things. The Ministry of Education sent the paper that these children had written to me in Manchester. I said, marvellous to think that here are these youngsters, aged between, I think, 13 and 17, saying, how do we develop our questioning insight? By building a Q Factor Centre. And I showed the paper that that they had written to a lot of people from Leningrad, the United States, at a big international conference, and said, you write from Leningrad to Perth, or from Cincinnati to Perth, or from Stockholm to Perth, because it's only if your children exchange their ideas with the other children that true learning will take place. So what I'm hoping is that action learning adds to traditional learning, to traditional education, this positive interest in how do I ask myself fresh questions. It's quite true. Before I can answer the question, before I can find the answer to the question, either by going to somebody who I think might know the answer, or turning to the encyclopedia and looking up the answer there, before I can expect to get the question answered, I have to discover what is the relevant question to put. This may be a bit difficult to explain, but I think the difference between action learning and traditional education is that action learning puts the first emphasis upon what it is you don't know and how you explore this ignorance of yours in order to say, now these are the questions which I should put, now I want the help of other people to answer the questions, or I must go to the library to get the answer.